This came after days of discussion between David Culley, the first-year head coach of the Houston Texans, obviously finishing his first season, and Nick Caserio, the general manager, and other members of the Houston brass. And this was going to be a top-down evaluation of everything that goes into the football product on the field for the Houston Texans. And in the end, what they decided was that Culley was not going to return for a second season. Nick Caserio informed him in person yesterday afternoon that there were other issues, in-game issues, disciplinary issues, but from what I understand, the philosophical issues were probably as much as anything. As far as where Houston goes, I would keep an eye on one very important name, Jerod Mayo.
And welcome to another episode, an emergency episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles, 115th podcast, and we're talking about the third head coach, as last night, or yesterday afternoon Central Time, David Culley became the least tenured head coach in history. As the churn continues on Kirby, I've got emergency contact who's been here through the hop trade, a couple of hirings, couple of firings, and here we are again to try and make a little sense of it all. But James from Texans Unfiltered, what would you have said the key reasons for, from a 50,000 foot view? What were the key reasons for Culley no longer being here?
They couldn't hire anybody else. I don't think anybody else. The only people I know that were willing to take the job were EB, but he wanted roster control, so he wasn't getting that. So I don't think they had an opportunity to hire anybody else. It seems that there was a agreement between Bill Belichick and Nick Caserio that Nick wouldn't take any of the Patriots assistants for the first year as general manager of the Texans. And so I think this was just, then you add to the fact like game management, managing of the coaching staff, all the things that we saw take part in this season. I do think there were some things to highlight for sure. Like I don't think this was just like this awful season. It was bad, but there were some positives to pull from it. But I think ultimately those are the things that really what it was. And I know everybody's like, oh, they set him up to fail. I'm pretty sure Culley knew what was going on. I can't see how he doesn't, and I think he was fine with it. But that's just an opinion.
Yeah. Well, he's going to ride off in the sunset with $22 million, probably buy a custom build himself a retirement ranch or whatever he wants to do in Tennessee. And life could be worse, and it is worse for a lot of people. So, and I think he said that, people feel sorry for me and all this kind of stuff. And I didn't feel sorry for him. I just felt it was unfair, like that, a lot of situations that we've been in, that he wasn't up to the task. And I thought that was abundantly clear from the first press conference, that he wasn't up to the task of handling the media. He just hadn't had experience of it because he hadn't done it as a wide receivers coach. You speak to the media a couple of times a year, and that's it. Yep. So he wasn't prepared from that point of view. He couldn't keep quiet. He hated lying because he was just too salt of the earth, honest type of guy about all the off-field distractions. And you wonder if he knew the whole time and he was just playing a charade, because it almost felt like that at times. The fact that he was getting coached in his ear through the game, telling him what to do, but then openly telling the media that he's being told what to do, or certainly it's been strongly suggested. Or Frank Ross has got his play sheet in front of him to tell because he doesn't want people to see that he's telling them what to do. Yep. Or certainly suggested it. And I think the opening press conference, I know Caserio's due to speak to the media in a couple of hours, but the opening conference, I felt right from that point, my opinion of him didn't really change. And I think at the early season, you got the infamous 6 quarters of good or acceptable. It certainly looked competitive, and then things started to unravel ever so slightly, and there were some good performances in there, but there was also some terrible ones and some circumstances why those ones were the good ones were the way they were as well. But in terms of the process of hiring, why do you think, because Caserio's talked about process over results, do you think it was all a ruse the entire time and this was always the plan, or did they just simply not evaluate him correctly?
I think this season was about process and not results. I don't think the long-term plan is that. I think if you were to ask Nick Caserio what this year's plan is specifically, and not like the future of the Texans, which a lot of times what he was asked. I think this year was about process. It was about culture. It was about finding a couple players from free agency, developing a couple rookies. I think they did that. I don't know how you feel, but I think from a free agency and draft standpoint, they found at least 4 out of the 5 players in the draft. No matter how you think about Davis Mills, you could think he's a starter, you could think he's a backup.
No, yeah.
At the end of the day, he was worth the third round.
Well, he played, yeah.
Roy Lopez is a starting defensive tackle. Nico Collins has shown some highlights. Brevin Jordan was a main focal point of the offense for a couple games and looked really good. Only question is Garrett Wallow, but the one game he did play, he had, I think he set a record for most tackles by a rookie, right, for the Texans.
Yeah.
And then in free agency, Desmond King, Gruger Hill, Tavir Thomas, Tremont Smith, Malik Collins, those are all guys that Nick basically hit on.
Yeah.
So I think there's a process.
Yeah, I wonder, because I think probably my thought is Caserio immune to criticism at this point? Because if you think we're now somewhat 40-odd million dead cap going into next year, which is you could say it's cost of doing business, sunk costs, etc. But it felt unnecessary when you've got guys who've never played, a lot of them, and then even when we were churning through guys with COVID. And then you think of the a number of trades, none of which yet really panned out at all, and some have been aborted as soon as they could do. So you think it's I don't know. I just wondered. I suppose that's what gives credence to the fact that you think, was this always a ruse the entire time, or it was always a plan? And obviously, you don't give it anywhere your hand to the public eye, because you potentially putting yourself at a competitive disadvantage if you do so. But I think if that was always the plan, then fair enough, and Culley was cool with it, and because it seems like on the surface you can see it seems like that, because it seemed like a guy that wasn't in a position to succeed just from his own capability, far less anything that was around him. If you take all the talent on the roster, the coaching staff that he did not select, it all felt very temporary. I was calling him caretaker Culley the whole time, so you always thought it'd be a 1 or 2 year deal. So that shouldn't be a surprise. I think you acknowledge him. He did a great, the best job he could with his capability and the stuff around him. But I just wonder if I think Caserio's now on the clock, isn't he? I think right now, because
100%.
this is the decision that will define his regime, because very few head coaches get to hire 3 guys.
Yeah, I don't even think it's just that decision specifically. Everything that you talked about, right? The moving on from Zach Cunningham, Whitney Merciless, and all the bad contracts. I don't know if I fault him for it, because if those players aren't going to play to the potential that they have been, we wouldn't fault any other GM for letting go of a player that isn't living up to the contract. How long has Whitney been asked? How long has everybody been on Whitney's track to cut him? Right? I mean, he hasn't been a great player for 2 years. Zach.
Oh yeah, no, yeah.
And so what do you do? You gotta either free it up now, or you free it up later. And why not just take that hit? And I think that's ultimately what it was. I think it was a full reset this year. And that's the way I see it. I think Nick stripped the house down to the frame, and now it's okay, Nick, you got the cap, you got the picks, you got the rocket in your pocket with Deshaun Watson. You're gonna get your head coach. Now you have a blank canvas. There's no excuses moving forward. You have everything that you need at your disposal to do a rebuild and do it right. You either do it or you don't, but you're gonna have to shit or get off the pot, basically.
Yeah, no, I think probably the dead cap money for me, he restructured Merciless, knowing he was always going to get cut. Therefore, the dead cap was increased. It's just moves like that, I think, kind of stick in my throat.
And the
a
trades
bit.
too, the trade, Anthony Miller trade.
Terrible.
But at the end of the day, you're gonna take risks and miss. I don't know any general manager that's gonna bat 1,000 on trades. Shaq Lawson, right? Both of those guys were high potential guys that just prior to us never reached their potential, but you took it based on the fact that maybe they would, and they didn't. And I mean, what'd we waste a 5th round pick that ultimately?
Yeah.
And then we got
that's
Roby.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, no, I get it. I think he's on the clock now. There was lots of factors that were kind of, you know, gave context to the point. I suppose the only way you could really feel sorry for Culley was a kind of public state of execution this week. Everybody knew it was going to happen.
Yeah,
they described it outwardly as an evaluation process. If you were inside that building, what do you think the real workings were going on? I just had visions of Nick, probably plus agent, plus probably other agents working the phone lines, gauging interest in the role, and assume they got to a point whereby they felt reasonably comfortable, reasonably assured that they would be able to get somebody of a caliber a guy who they could trust for 2 or 3 years at a minimum, and take this team forward further than David Culley could. And it's hard to see, many candidates who wouldn't, but I think they maybe spent the week just feeling that bit out.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of conversations happening within the building. Do I think that the plan was to fire Culley after 1 year? I don't think that was necessarily the plan. I think the conversations were, is there enough here for us to get at least one more year out of Culley? And is there anything that we could do from a management perspective to better support him to be more successful next season? So I think that was a conversation. And then I think there was also conversations, just like you said, through back channels, trying to figure out, is there a candidate, is one of Nick's candidates available to come now? And if so, do we go down that path? I think as far as the ultimate decision when it came to David Culley, one, I do think it has to do with Nick got the AOK from his candidate that he'll be coming. I mean, there's no other reason for you to fire the coach. And if you can't hit on your candidate this time, and we have to go down the same path that we went with Culley, where there was nobody else that, was worth taking the job, well, then you find yourself in an even worse position. I know a lot of the national reporters are saying oh, it's because he wouldn't make changes on offense. I know he didn't hire the staff, and I know that seems to be the counter argument for him, but he did come out in multiple interviews and say that the staff is coming back. And, you have to wonder, was he fighting with Nick about Tim Kelly coming back? Was he pushing, right? But he did come out. I mean, you should never, as a head coach at the end of your season, say everybody's coming back. They should be coming back, right? Because you don't know, one. Two, you don't know what other positions, maybe Tim Kelly gets another offer somewhere else. He shouldn't, but we've seen crazier things happen. You just should never make a very defining statement saying that this isn't changing. And I think that ultimately was okay, we're obviously not aligned. And we thought we could go another year, but ultimately, we need to go in another direction.
Yeah, he was just always incapable of holding statements, wasn't he? We're at the end of the season. We're going to evaluate everything as we would do, regardless of the record. And we'll look.
Is it just me, or did he seem after this year played out? I went back last night and watched the first intro press conference to him. Does he not come off as somebody who is overacting to kind of make it look like I deserve this, but also I'm only here for a little bit of time? Just his statements and his energy and the way he answered questions,
nervous.
He came off so fake. He came off just not genuine. And
it was forced because he's not
exactly forced. Yeah. And it was that every press conference. Even at the end when he had unfortunately you feel sorry for me, all that stuff. I don't know, man. It all seemed too forced from him.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, if somebody said to me, look, I want you to come and do a job that you're probably not capable of, and we're going to pay for 5 years, and you only need to do one, who wouldn't have taken it? You can't blame him, I suppose.
I don't feel bad for him.
Well, exactly, yeah. And I think the fact that we're in that position is horrendous as a football club, and I think that's the issue, that we should never have been in that position, that we have to go through literally a public year of nothingness to. And it's tough, I think, for everybody involved. But as you said, I think the difference in why anybody should feel positive if they didn't already, and look, they've got to get the hire right, and they've got to get loads of stuff right between now and when game time rolls around in another 6-7 months' time. But this has a feeling of progress, and I think last year, at multiple points, there was some small silver linings, which are probably too early to tell if it is true progress. But actually, with Culley involved, you can never really necessarily get that that progress. But I think what's key is the fact that, you know, you can move forward with somebody who hopefully, you know, is their guy. And of all the times that they need to get it right, it's now. I thought that just going back to that previous point, the additional narrative, that's just to flower it, and I can guarantee who that came from. You know, I think there's a guy who continually puts out stuff to national media that's not Nick Caserio, that's not very accurate, it's not very smart, it doesn't really do anybody any favours. So, you know, we'll leave it at that. But that was just unnecessary additional kind of I think, and it goes back to when Brian Game was knifed. All of a sudden, it was almost the exact same phraseology used at the time. Yep. We're going to conduct a thorough evaluation of football operations, and all of a sudden somebody's gone, and both times they were the nice guy, and so be it. Different context, different situations, different players, you know, all lots of different stuff, but a common theme again. And that common person is still in the building. But I mean, I suppose, you know, he will do his dark work, however he see fit until the day he leaves. And I think we've just got to deal with it. But I suppose it's who, how, and where, and next. And I'm not sure of the answer to that.
As far as who the head coach is,
yeah.
I mean, I think it might be too soon for Brian Flores. You know, Bill O'Brien 2.0. I don't know how that would go over. You have to wonder if maybe he learned from his mistakes in Miami. And then if there's, you know, there was some alignment issues between him and Chris Greer. Do him and Nick share that same alignment and philosophy? And are they able to kind of right the ship? I like Flores better than I like any of the other guys that they're talking about. You know, I can at least know that he's been a head coach. He inherited a terrible Miami team. You know, but at times they seem to play really well for him. It really is like a Bill O'Brien type of story. When you just look at like underperforming, but then, you know, making enough of a run and like all of these things.
Pulls it around in the season. So I took some bullet points and let's just see if this rings any bells, right? So this is just, I read about 5 or 6 articles this morning, just typed Google Brian Flores. Okay. And obviously somebody leaves the building, there's mudslinging, there's people got access to grind. So you got to contextualize it with that. But an abrasive communicator, he fell out with the GM, the owner, and his quarterback. He continually pressed for more power, even when the GM base didn't sign a single player without his okay and checking it with him. He treats his guys differently, and veterans have a very different working life to others, to the point where he walked past people in the corridor, didn't even acknowledge the guys that were on his 53. A paranoia about the media, and particularly around injuries. He got the PR guy fired. Again, a common theme. Height, weight, speed, very focused on his evaluations, to the point where he held it against other players. You know, just swap the name Brock Osweiler or whatever it is with Tua Tagovailoa. He was telling Tua to go and get steroid tested every week because he believed that his physical transformation, and fell out with his personal trainer as well. He didn't believe it. He churns through coaches and isn't able to put the right guys around him. And overall, he's probably more suited to being a defensive or a position group coordinator.
It's Bill O'Brien. I mean, it's Bill O'Brien to a T. Like I think everybody knows that. But I think the one thing, I think if you had a poll of like the previous Belichick like tree, and you go back and actually looked at Joe Judge, Josh McDaniels, Romeo Crennel at the beginning of his career, I think a lot of that, like from what I remember, Romeo changed when he had that unfortunate situation in Kansas City where a player,
Melo's
and so everybody said that there was a change in Romeo at that time. But when you look at all those guys, they all come from Bill Belichick, and Bill Belichick conducts himself in a very similar manner. I think that none of them are Bill Belichick, so they try to pull from that as much as they can. But at the end of the day, like if you're not that person, like you're not going to be able to mimic and lay out the blueprint that Bill has, because Bill can act like that because he's won, and that's the difference, right? These guys come in early on and are that way, and it's like, dude, you haven't done anything to be able to walk by a player on your roster and not say anything. because they don't respect you enough yet. And I think it's just a Patriots thing. That's what it seems like to me.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's right either. Like that's not how you should run a team.
Yeah, I mean, they're both East Coast kind of come up, kind of relatively the blue collar backgrounds, come up the hard way, paid their due kind of guys. So, that comes with a certain stereotype, whether that's true or not, regardless of, any other kind of intrinsic factors. I think, there's guys there that, they have that hard edge to them. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think people are too wrapped up in their feelings a lot of the time these days, and it's particularly this. But at the same time, there's no escaping the fact that you've got to appease this younger generation of talent, who are brought up in a very different manner to the previous generations, and so you have to kind of appeal to that. So I think it'd be if it is Brian Flores. I keep going back to the fact: can Nick sort of cover? Can Nick manage him without the point of them detracting from each other? And I think yes, probably can, because he's professional, he's logical. I think you'll see it from other people's points of view. He can handle it. But then how long does that last? I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because all these guys have a time frame on them, because ultimately at some point it's going to come to a head. And I think as well, so you've got that. I think, can Caserio manage him over a period of time enough that's going to make this team successful? And to think you're going to be where you need to be in 2 years isn't enough. So, it's like a 3 to 4 year project to be, worth a damn in the league. So can he come in and be sustainable enough? And then as well, is he going to suffer Jack Easterby and he's sort of interfering and rumblings around the team and doing whatever the hell he does on a daily basis? It doesn't seem like that. Considering he's very much the control freak. I mean, I know we're comparing him to O'Brien. O'Brien brought him in, but ultimately Easterby was the guy that got rid of him. So, he'll be aware of that. I'm sure he probably, they probably all talk at some point. There'll be conversations had between these guys, previous and proposed new staff that may go on. But I think it's a strange one, because do you think? Well, probably my question is, James, do you think Caserio can manage him long enough, and do you think he's going to be able to cope with Caserio's kind of hands-on approach?
Yeah, I think Nick has the ability to be able to manage him enough. And I think with this hands-on approach, I think because of where that comes from and them understanding and seeing that firsthand within the New England organization, I think that it could definitely work. I don't know, like at the end of the day, when I'm looking at the 3 candidates that we're looking at this point, I really don't care which one it is, because like Jerod Mayo, I don't know who he is as a coach. Like,
well, we don't know what he does. Yeah.
No, we know he's a linebackers coach, and we know he was a great player, Hall of Fame potentially player, but we don't really know what he's going to bring to the table. We've seen what Josh McDaniels did in Denver. Ultimately, I guess he made the playoffs with Tim Tebow as his quarterback. But like with Brian Flores, I don't know. Like, I think all 3 are the same, to be honest. I don't really think any of them are any different. So, can Nick manage it? I think Nick can manage it. I think Nick will manage it. I can't see a situation where Nick doesn't manage it. I've also seen reports that Brian Flores and Jack Easterby are like best friends. So, so I don't think Jack would be a problem.
Well, I think they have to be, don't they? I think there's definitely a closeness there with all 3 of the names, isn't there? That's
100%.
That's the commonality.
Yeah, and so when it comes down to like managing Flores or Mayo or McDaniels, whoever it is, like, I don't know if anything's any different between the 3. They all have the same philosophy. They all came from the same defense and same offense. At the end of the day, I feel like Nick's putting more on his plate by bringing this philosophy here, because he's going to have to do more work instead of actually just employing a head coach that has his own philosophy, and he can pitch it to Nick and Nick see the difference, but also trust the head coach to execute, and Nick also execute on the personnel side to be able to provide the players needed for the schemes and things of that nature. So I think Nick's making it harder on himself by going this route. Will it work? I don't know. I mean, the chances, the likelihood tells you no. All of everything we've seen will tell you that this isn't going to work anyways. But you just have to hope that. Every team has tried to replicate the Patriots, and all of them have failed. You have to think at some point one team will not fail at some point. And if you're taking the guy who was there for 20 years and helped build it, I think the chances are higher that the Texans actually hit and do it right, going the Patriots way, than any other team. But either way, it's 50-50.
Well, I suppose that's it, isn't it? Because this is ultimately the second go at trying to do this. So, or third, really. Actually, if you think you went to Gain because it was philosophical alignment, then you went to the power, the flat structure model, and then now you're going to go back to the well again. And I suppose if he does, I think he's making a rod for his own back. I think Nick shortens his own timelines for success, and that's my ultimate fear, James. And I said this to somebody earlier. I was just speaking to somebody, and I said that's my big fear, that it's going to have to eventually go so bad that you go nuclear, and you rip it right down to the ground. And if Cal's if he's capable of that, I don't think he is, but that might be the only choice at one point, and then you really start again. Albeit it won't be from a base of zero talent on a roster like this. Well, you've got to think you'll pick up some bits along the way. So that doesn't scare me too much, but it's just the time length is more seasons of shit, and I think that's quite possible. But do you think in any way, stretch or form, they go out with those three guys?
Unfortunately, I think I can't see any other coach. I really can't. Like I've racked my brain trying to figure out, like, the only one that I could see that might be a somewhat of a dark horse is still a Patriots guy, and that's in Dabble. But you have to wonder if Dabble's been away long enough to see other aspects of what the Bills have been able to do to potentially pull from that as well. And it not just be a Patriots way, but it also just be an experience that I've had and seen with the Bills to be able to pull those two together and maybe make a mesh. But that's the only head coaching candidate I see that would not be the Mayo, McDaniels, or Flores. And outside of that, I can't see them going after like a Clint Kubiak or a Nathaniel Hackett or any of those guys.
Yeah, Brian Callahan.
Callahan, Dennis Allen. At the end of the day, like, honestly, at this point, like, just bring Bill O'Brien back. Like, what's the difference?
Yeah. It's funny when you see him get interviewed I think he interviewed today or yesterday in Jacksonville, and and the point is, they say he doesn't have any interest in personnel and doesn't want to, he'll see how long that lasts. But if people don't, they don't change overnight. That's for sure. And a season at Alabama is not going to do that either. But I always wonder that as well. If Nick, because it's so similar again. This is just the feeling of repetition of when they fired Brian Gain to get Caserio, when they jumped the gun there. So obviously they learned from that, and you've got to hope. Again, the same protagonist that pulling the strings and influencing the owner, and he just signs off whatever. And as I said, he spends dollar bills like Culley disregarded chewing gum wrappers. I think he's just he keeps churning through money. It's not for a lack of spending, perhaps more intelligent and misplaced advice. But yeah, it seems like there's only a couple of guys that they can go through. What do you expect the kind of timelines to be like on this, really, now that you've got? You've got 7 other openings. It looks like Dan Quinn's probably going to get the Denver job. I think he's probably the only one that kind of seems a front runner. The rest are probably all up for debate. And Brian Flores is interviewing in Chicago today, so he could maybe not leave there, potentially have a second interview, and you're looking at a Jerod Mayo, and then you're in a position where you've hired a guy who's never been a coordinator for the second time again, which doesn't look good, and probably has higher risk associated to it. But what do you think the timelines are like on this? Do you think they move quickly and it's all kind of teed up, or?
I think by next Friday we'll have a head coach.
Yeah, as quick as that.
Yeah, I do. I think if we're gonna go Mayo or McDaniels, like, they play Saturday, right? Bills Patriots. Saturday, Saturday, Sunday.
Either
way, once that's over, unless the Patriots go on a run, I think that's the only thing that'll delay it. And I know you can interview throughout the week, but I think Nick has too much respect for Bill to pull away for an interview during a playoff week. So, I would say, if the Patriots lose and it's not Flores, then, I think it should be sooner. But if Flores gets another job, then we'll know at that point, like, it's whenever the Patriots are out of the playoffs.
Yeah, no, I think so. I just hope some other names emerge and they at least look and kick the tires on a couple.
I'm sure they probably will, to throw off the perception.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it's a fait accompli, it would seem. In terms of that, isn't it? I think it's again, just goes back to that predictability, the repetition, and familiarity of it all, and that's all had a particular outcome to this point. And if this is the 3.0 trying of, Patriots South, and it ultimately is that, you can't sugarcoat it any more than the way it is, then
and to be honest, I don't care if it's Patriots South as long as there's results.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people get confused. It's like, look, if they're able to mimic and take what they're doing there and can win, I don't care.
Works, yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
I really can care less what it looks like. But now we're at the point where results matter. We all knew last season was a throwaway. But moving forward, that there's no time for that. Like, if you believe Davis Mills is the guy, and you're trading Deshaun, then all the eggs in the basket. If you don't believe he's the guy, take another quarterback. Let's get, whatever it is, but there's no excuses moving forward. Once this head coach is in place, like, the results either have to be there, or you have to hope that Cal at some point says, okay, we've done this Patriots thing too many times. It's time to strip it back down again and start over.
Yeah. I mean, I was there in Foxborough at week 17 against the Jags, and, I think you can see by the people around you watching the game in that stadium that they are used to success, whether it's, whatever sport in that city, they're used to success. It was a 50, they put a 50 up on Jacksonville, and it was kind of like, yeah, well, that was expected. We're a better team than them, and they're sitting bottom of the pile, so that should be the result. So, you can kind of see how the other half live, I suppose, and the good side. I think we've seen how the other half live this season. But yeah, no, it was interesting to witness that firsthand. A very interesting model which has been just continually found success, or relatively success post Brady, and they continue to do it. So yeah, so if it works, nobody will ever care. I think it's the fact that you're trying to copy it and you fail is the worst thing, isn't it? And so time will tell on this, I suppose. And obviously you've got the kind of big Watson angle that needs to clear up. What do you, just to finish up, Jace, what do you think on the dynamic of Flores being an athlete's first client? Obviously Deshaun, everybody knows, and most infamously is also an athlete's first client. I don't know if you heard that interview with David Magaleta with the guy from ESPN on the podcast. Really interesting. I was really interested to listen to it because I don't know much about him, but I've talked a lot about him, and I felt there was a duty to do that. A very interesting guy, Magaleta, and I thought it was how he talked about the situation. Very confident it would be finalised, and I think that's just his persona more than anything else. But there's no way, but he is a lawyer, so therefore he's got more grounding than most agents to try and to probably got a sense of law, even though he was a mergers and acquisition trained lawyer in terms of speciality. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting, that interview. That he basically had no doubts about his career would continue and people would want him, and had nothing but positive things to say about him, and felt the truth would come out in the wash over time and all this kind of stuff. All the things you'd expect agents to say, right enough. But a guy doesn't do many public interviews, so I thought it was rather interesting with Ryan Clark from ESPN, and it all seemed like they were very set. Now, obviously, their main route out was to go to Miami. They didn't expect Flores to be on the market. Not a lot of people did. What do you think about that whole dynamic? And obviously there's this kind of wishful narrative, if Flores was to be hired, there would be a change of heart from Watson and all that kind of stuff. Got a lot to unpack there, but what do you think of that whole kind of situation?
I just can't see a situation where Deshaun's back here. I think there's too much he would have to do on his side to clear it up, not just from an allegations perspective, but also to a fan base in a city and an organization, right? Like, no matter what you believe or don't believe, like he spent the last 14 months trashing an organization, David leaking information and reports to media, to have reports written and stories made. And, I just can't see it. His problem is with ownership, and I think ownership's problem is with him. I can't see Janice just being okay with bringing back a quarterback to be the face of a franchise after these allegations, and then also everything that he's put the franchise through. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, I feel like there's just
too much water under the bridge. Yeah.
Like, what is he going to do? How would he do it?
Well, that's it. It would have to be an unbelievable kind of PR reparation job, and
kind of like how his contracts, right? We've seen him act before.
Yeah.
So we saw him cry and do all that when he signed his contract. So maybe we'll be able to see something like that. If he.
Yeah. It's funny though, because you see people come back and when I think somebody asked that question, I think it was the guy, is it Howe from The Athletic, the former sort of Patriots kind of or sort of Northeast beat writer, and he said like what you said there, his issue is with ownership. But I mean, certainly how I perceive it, and I heard John Lopez say this as well actually the other week. He's been in the city for a long, long time, and if you listen to that final interview, the last time he ever spoke, he said it's about people thinking they've got power when they don't really. And actually, basically, there was too many cooks trying to stir the pot in that front office and the coaching staff. It just wasn't going to work. And I think when you look at the Andre Johnson tweet, and Andre Johnson's been in there, speaking with ownership a number of weeks. I always kind of think it's not actually Cal per se, because how can you be upset at the teddy bear? He's just the teddy bear with the deep pockets. I think he's upset at Cal's handling and his inclusion of Easterby and how they didn't go in a new direction when it seemed clear, because we've just said that 4 or 5 times. It was all the same. Nothing ever changes or whatever, nothing ever, whatever the tweet was when the day Caserio was hired. So, I think it's probably not a personal vendetta against ownership from Watson to the owners, but I think, as you said, I think you tweeted out yesterday, when your majority and ultimate owner is a woman and you've got 22 allegations of sexual misconduct against women, that's a big barrier. So I think you could see it getting fixed the other way.
Yeah.
But it just depends how forgiving and which I believe she is forgiving from some of the stories in terms of the sort of internal wrangles after Bob died. Within the family structure that we've all kind of suffered from publicly and they've kind of suffered in private. So, I mean, ultimately, how can you forgive a guy who quit on you? I think that's the trouble.
And, yesterday was kind of eye-opening to me because I saw, I tweeted that out, and the replies were very telling to me, and they were kind of surprising because I feel like in sports is the one place where, you can kind of forgive and forget to win, right? Like, I feel like that's like the one area in life where
it's like money in real life.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great analogy. Like 100%. That's exactly what it is, right? Like a lot of times these athletes can do whatever they want, but if they come back to the field and they win, the fans are going to come back. But yesterday, I was really surprised to see how many people were saying, I could never root for him again. One guy was like, I bought his jersey right before January, and I never got to wear it, and I could never probably throw that on again.
I've got one in the attic with a tag on. So
yeah, so I think a lot of people say, "Oh, winning cures all." I don't know if this is a situation where that's the case. Maybe it can be after a certain amount of time, 4 or 5 years, whatever it may be. But I can't see it being a long-term thing. And I can't see it. I really can't. Is he an amazing player? Dude, it's undeniable how great of an athlete and quarterback Deshaun Watson actually is. But you have to come to a point in life where it's like, do you take that over the individual?
Yeah, well, as you said, it's like money in real life. There's a reason why he's still got that same woman hanging around with him, and they're tweeting out pictures or Instagramming pictures of them in Switzerland. And I saw actually the hotel put like a sort of cake or some sort of biscuit thing with the Texans logo on it in the room for him. Obviously, people in Switzerland, probably not anywhere near the intricacies of all the kind of stuff that's gone on, and nor should they be. It's a lot of time expended and wasted for many people professionally and in most of our cases vocationally. I don't know. It's a strange kind of scenario. Yeah, and there's like a tiny percent of me that thinks, could you just let it go if you got a chance? Because I mean, ultimately, whatever you get back is never going to be enough, and that will always remain. That fact will always remain true. You'll never replace him.
You'll never find another Deshaun Watson.
No,
never.
No, and you waited that long, so. But it'd be interesting to see if Flores is that big of a character, and again he looks for father figures. Doesn't he? You've seen that over time and time again. They keep getting sacked everywhere he goes, so I think that shows you his judge of character as an individual, and actually how he. And obviously he's been misadvised, but I think he's flocked to O'Brien, he's flocked to, obviously his agent, and then there was a link with Flores there. And you got to wonder, but I mean, if you're Brian Flores, do you think Brian Flores, just say he gets hired next week, we're sitting here a week later, and Brian Flores is hired, do you think he would say, let me do what I can, and I'll speak to my agent, Athletes First, and let's see if we can make this right? Do you think people make peace if that was a real opportunity? Forget what fans think, because people have been pissed off with this team for so long, it can't really get that much worse, but the only way it can get better is winning on the field. Do you think everybody around the table, all the various stakeholders, would accept it?
I can't see Janice allowing it. I can't. I can't. When you look at the philanthropy work that him and her and Bob did with domestic abuse and just women in general, that has to be one of the hardest pills to swallow. I don't know. I really can't see. From what I've heard, she has said that he will never be in a jersey ever again for our team.
Yeah, it's funny though, because when you see her at the drafts and stuff, she comes across as completely delirious.
Yeah,
to the point, it's almost like kind of like that old age kind of, anything could happen to them and they'd be delighted by it. So it's strange, and maybe that's just the sort of excitement of doing a draft pick or whatever it is. But the small clip that you've ever seen of them, it feels like she's, she could be anywhere doing anything, saying anything to anybody. So to have that hardline stance, do you think it's maybe Hannah that does it? Because she's the succession plan. That's that's clear.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if they can all come to an okay with it, I don't know if David's ego would allow it.
No, I don't think he would either. Yeah, there's too many egos and morality.
At the end of the day, David's really dug his heels in, and he would have to eat some pretty major crow at this point to kind of just give the A-OK to that. I don't know. I believe this whole thing was agent driven from the beginning, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I mean, 100%.
This was get him to a market where I can make more money. That's what it boils down to. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if they. I don't know. There's too many egos involved. Flores has an ego. The only person who doesn't seem to have an ego is Nick. And I'm sure he does, right? We all do.
Yeah, he will have to have some, some form of that.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I don't know if this is on the level of Deshaun, David, or Brian. Maybe, but I don't know. I doubt it.
Yeah. And do you think they stick with the same coordinator, say it is? Because it seemed clear to me, I'd heard a number of people, and I'd asked around a couple of people, that Pep Hamilton had openly said, I don't want to be here. And
that's
wanted
what I was
out.
told.
And said, doesn't like the sort of way it's been run, doesn't like the kind of culture, he's not down with it. And then there was a report, again, it was somebody tweeted it back at me yesterday, because I said, I thought he was gone. It was a report I never heard from, I think, for CBS, saying that he was expected to stay. And again, maybe it's money, but and a title, and then it saves him, and it's in a system, in a position. Whereas if he goes to, say, Carolina, where he was asked to interview, he doesn't necessarily know who his quarterback's going to be. Whereas at least he knows Davis Mills, at least for next year.
Yeah,
he's probably going to be working with a guy. He gives him a bit of security, more money, doesn't have to move his family, etc. That can change people's opinion pretty quickly about the culture they have to deal with on a daily basis. But I was surprised at that. And if it is Brian Flores, do you think he meshes with Lovey? Because I think Lovey's a big character too.
Yeah, that's the interesting piece for me is, Flores is a defensive guy. Different philosophy from the Tampa 2. I don't know. I mean, can Nick say, hey, Flores, don't worry about the offense. Don't worry about the defense. I just, that's the part where, like I said, Nick's making more work for himself, because how do you manage that? Hey, head coach, come in, manage the game. give your thumbs up on the game plan for defense and offense and special teams. But outside of that, like, we don't need you doing anything else. Like, just be I don't know. That's weird to me.
Yeah, I think somebody's going to go. This will be unexpected. They did say yesterday as well there were expectations that obviously were not touched upon. Tim Kelly was fired, which was an obvious one. Good start to the season.
Now, could it be Jerod Mayo as defensive coordinator?
Possibly, yeah, because it's a promotion, so you can take him. Yeah, so you can take him. Yeah. You think as well, and I would love to see them go out the box, like a guy like D'Amico Ryans. What's the guy in New Orleans?
But you couldn't get D'Amico. Are you talking about for a head coach?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I know it's a former player, so it's kind of easy route to go down, but
of course.
But I think you want an up. Yeah. I think he was probably, in terms of.
He reminds me of Jerod Mayo. What people say of Jerod Mayo is very similar to what I've seen from D'Amico. When he was here, he was a coach on the field.
Yeah. You don't get many of those, clear kind of leaders on a team, and I suppose maybe Vrabel's kind of set a footprint for that and kind of set, given some precedent for that to work. So maybe people will be, get on 1 year, tick the box as a coordinator, and they were always destined to.
Isn't it funny that Vrabel is now like the guy that people look to for this, like the guy who can't coach the defense to save his life, can't coach the defense even now, but what he does do well is he manages everything around him. Yeah. And that was the difference. That's the difference between him and OB. Like, OB couldn't do that. He had to be involved, had to have his hands in everything, had to have his input said. You couldn't fight back on an opinion O'Brien had. Vrabel, on the other hand, is very involved, managing, and also open. And I think that's ultimately what has set apart Mike Vrabel and Bill O'Brien, and likely Mike Vrabel and Brian Flores.
Yeah, no, I think so, and I think that's it, isn't it? And that's the difference, though, because I think people just assume the best coordinators of the best record on the best teams are in the playoffs, ultimately then get transferred into the light for head coach. But actually, that's not what you need. What you need is exactly what you just outlined: somebody who can be involved and oversee and get involved at a certain point, but give people the autonomy to go and coach. Brian used to talk about that. He used to say, Belichick said to me, just make sure you let the guys go and coach. But he couldn't do that. He was too much. Yeah, he couldn't do it. He couldn't relinquish control. That was
truly his biggest downfall, in my opinion.
Yeah, people who put around him. Yeah. Yes, men. People with less personalities than him. People that were willing to concede, at the right time. And I think that's it. And I suppose, I just hope it's a feeling of progress, but I just hope it's not a feeling of false progress, because I remember all of last off season, because if they botch this again, then it's got to be the big red button that gets pressed at that point, because it's now's the time to shine. I think people have liked to praise Caserio for doing what he could, I suppose, with a short in hand. Didn't have a full draft, can't evaluate that, but everything else has kind of been subpar.
Didn't have a large extent.
Yeah, didn't have anything. Brought in loads of guys, a couple of hits. Probably the hit rate was okay, like you said. But yeah, let's see what we got, Nick. You're on the clock now, mate. So let's see what you got and go and earn that $7 million a year or whatever you're picking up.
So before we end it, what are your predictions?
Yeah, I mean it just seems so obvious, doesn't it? As soon as point predicting it, it feels like it'll be one of those three guys. As you said, they might interview somebody and you get a candidate for that. Well, that would be my hopeful prediction, that they'll interview 3 or 4 guys out there and they'll get blown away by somebody and take them. Providing they're okay.
You remember last year, there were so many leaks, so many reports of who was their guy. Like, I was told it was EB until EB wanted roster control, and then like
money.
Yeah, and then people were Leslie Frazier, Jim Caldwell. We interviewed Joe Brady. We tried to interview Brian Dabble, and then out of nowhere, David Culley. So you have to hope that there's a chance that it's a very similar process, and everything that's being reported is just completely wrong, which I wouldn't be surprised. It seems like things are pretty buttoned up on the inside of NRG. I think he leaks what he wants to leak. I don't think information leaks and he doesn't want it to leak, at least to me, based on what we've seen. So you have to hope that it's a kind of a redo of last year, but it's just the right guy instead of the fall guy.
Yeah, I hope so. But you go back to that point, like Leslie Fraser. What's the other guy? You just mentioned the other one that's Caldwell. Yeah, like if you were going to have a 2-year fix, surely those guys were in a better position than the one you hired. So it all seems strange, and I suppose we'll find out the truth in the fullness of time. But all that matters right now is they just nail it. But yeah, I would love to see a hopeful prediction would be somebody comes from the outside and they just said, look, there was no way we couldn't take this guy. Even like somebody who I would prefer somebody that was experienced and done it before, and learnt lessons. It could come in and add things rather than the hot new guy, because I think that's always the thirst from people and fans and media. Well, partly because the agents are paying them and not directly, but with information, right, and intel over time. They're pushing the next generation because they know once you've been anointed at head coach, you'll always find a job some level if you want it. Whereas the most money they're going to make is by getting new guys to the top of the tree and push that. So that's why you get that narrative. So it's not a real reflection on who's the best candidate for the job. It's a real reflection of who's going to generate secondary and tertiary income in the parallel industries that surround the league. So that's where you get that. That's where you get that push from. It's not necessarily representative of the best talent. So I'd probably prefer it was somebody who could come in and bring experience, like a Doug Peterson, like somebody like that who's been there, seen there, done it, and won a title, and can actually develop a culture and a squad around them that is conducive to winning. Paste and copy of incremental or snippets of elsewhere who've done it because of factors nothing to do with them is wishful thinking. But let's hope it's not that. But it seems predictable. But it's Nick pushing his cards to the centre of the table. So let's see what he comes up with. But you've got to think he's comfortable with the notion that they're going to get somebody.
Yeah.
Or they would have just stuck with Culley, I think, because that whole thing about philosophical differences, give me a fucking break. You know what I mean? He had no philosophy. He was a patsy from day one.
100%.
So, any final thoughts before we wrap up, James? I appreciate the time, mate. Always.
Yeah, of course.
Good to chat to you.
No, I think we kind of hit on everything. We just got to hope that in an ideal scenario, it's not the Patriots. Well, like I said, if it's the Patriots way and it works, the glass is half full, right? I mean, if it works, great. If it doesn't, then, it's on Nick. But ideally, I'd like to see something different. I'd like to see a different candidate. I'd like for everybody to be wrong that has leaks, and somebody comes out of nowhere. Even Brian Daboll, to me, I think would be a very interesting hire. What he's done with Josh Allen, I think it'd be interesting to see, if that's something he could also do. If he kept Pep as OC, maybe you get more out of Mills, who knows? But, Daboll, Clint Kubiak, like something different, just something different. Yeah. I would love to see Clint. I think Clint would be awesome and fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Is he OC right now? Yeah.
No, he got fired when the coaching staff for the Vikings.
Okay, so you could take him as OC and get that offense, because I think that offense suits Mills. That
100%.
Offense has got a chance. Yeah, is a perfect fit for Davis Mills. So, even more so than it would have been our previous guy. So, I think that's got to be a guy that you hope for. But yeah, you just want fresh ideas. I know a lot of stuff isn't fresh, and you don't know who's in the background because I've taken all off the website, so we're not quite sure who's actually making, some of the decisions and the input in the draft and free agency and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so a feeling of progress, and hopefully that'll get us on the right track to results. But it feels all very similar. But James, thank you very much for your time. Hopefully this can lets everybody out there make a little bit of sense of what's going on again. It's another off season. It's another sort of period of change. And the worst comes to worst. If you look forward, you've got week 9. The Texans are down 35-0 at halftime, and Brain Flores is cussing out somebody as he runs up the tunnel, and it's all happened all over again. That's just the vision I got in my head.
Wouldn't that be hilarious?
Yeah. History does repeat itself, so we'll see. But James, thanks very much for your time. Everybody, thanks very much for listening. I am due an article out at some point. It's been a lull for me in terms of motivation of writing something, but I've had a few ideas recently. Davis Mills and some other kind of stuff in terms of reviewing a year. Culley didn't make it a year. Casario's now in year 2, or coming up for year 2. Yep. So it's hopefully change and success, or close steps towards success on the horizon. And you never know, we might have a buttload of draft picks to go and make that period equally as interesting, or as interesting as ever has been, because we've never had that before. So it's all go. But thanks everyone, and we'll catch you again next week after we listen to Caserio speak to the press this afternoon.